Welcome to the Unlist. Today I have for you a showdown between Dior Homme and Dior Homme. Yes, see? Dior Homme and Dior Homme. These two Dior Hommes are going to face off against one another, and I'd like you to tell me in the comment section which one you like better and why. Although I don't want there to be any real hate for either of these. So if you're going to say something particularly stupid, I'm just going to have you keep it to yourself. And if you don't keep it to yourself, I'll delete your comment. So keep it respectful. However, I would like to hear from you what your favorite version of Dior Homme is. And for sake of simplicity, I don't want you getting super pedantic about which month or year, batch variation, batch code, da-da-da-da-da. Dior fans can get pretty obsessive the same way Creed fans do. We have threads on base notes devoted entirely to tracking individual batch codes for both versions of the fragrance, by the way, not just the old one. And it gets a little bit sweaty, okay? It gets a little bit too sweaty. I'm like, go outside, breathe some fresh air, touch some grass, get some sun, you know, talk to some human beings, do something, right? However, I will make an exception for silver stem versus black stem. And the reason for that is those of you who have followed Dior Homme know that the original 2005 release, which ran all the way until 2010, so 5 years, the original release was perfumed by Olivier Polge at the time of Showdown. And in 2011, when Dior decided to appoint Francois Demachy as master perfumer of the house, they also made a decision to no longer work with other oil houses, to stock their own inventory, create their own fragrances, using their own chem labs, their own internal supply. They basically do what Chanel does now. But with so many of their legacy fragrances basically under contract with oil houses, the formulas being kept secret from them, obviously, they weren't going to be given access to those formulas. And some of those formulas probably contain captive materials anyway. So Francois Demachy was tasked with the job of taking every single legacy Dior fragrance and recomposing them from the ground up. So that way Dior, or more specifically LVMH, could own the formula. And thus that resulted in the silver stem Dior Homme, composed by Olivier Polge, being replaced by the black stem, composed by Francois Demachy. Now, the intent wasn't to reformulate the fragrances to be different in smell. It was to make them own the formulas. In some cases, Demachy took a bit of creative liberty. In other cases, he was extremely true to the original. He didn't want to mess with the success of the fragrance. And in other cases, he actually improved where it was an older fragrance from the 70s or 80s and certain materials had been removed due to reformulation. He was able to restore what was lost. Many people note that the Demachy version of Fahrenheit, introduced in 2011, was superior to the Edward Fleischer versions that had stood in their place throughout the 2000s, which was a reformulation that was undertaken with the first IFRA restrictions of 2001, 2002. So that was actually an improvement for many people. But in the case of Dior Homme, it meant that we got a black stem in place of a silver stem, and 90% of the fragrance is the same. It's really only different in a very small, minute number of ways. And I will talk about those ways when we get there. But obviously, after 2019, Demachy had just grown tired of the entire design of the fragrance, and I'm guessing sales had slowed to the point where Dior said, okay, you know what? It's time to replace this fragrance. We'll do the same thing we did with Miss Dior, where they replaced Miss Dior with a different Miss Dior and then relegated the old one to a sidebar. They also replaced Dior Homme with an entirely new unrelated formula, and then took the old one and again made it a sidebar. And that's when we got this in 2020. This happened by surprise. So many people in the online fragrance community were disgusted and taken aback. They were abhorred by it because they were not notified. Dior was a little bit, well, frankly, a little bit shitty. They didn't tell anyone that they were going to replace their favorite fragrance. It just, one day was a new day, and then this was on the shelf. It was like, Mother, I crave violence, whatever the meme is. I woke up today and chose violence. That's what Dior did. Dior woke up one day and chose violence, and then we got this. No warning. They even had the same model. They had, what's his face from Twilight? Oh, I can't remember his name. But they had him, and they just continued to use him. So they even had the same face in the commercials, just different scent now. And you know, Robert Pattinson. They had Robert Pattinson. He was the face of this bottle, and he was the face of this bottle. So really, no one knew any different until they actually smelled the fragrance and realized it was different. And a lot of people would have been much kinder to the reception of this fragrance had they known it was coming. And maybe, just maybe, had they either renamed this one or renamed this one and let them both be available side by side. Let there be a phase in and phase out period. Not just one day, this is on the shelf, you go to sleep, you wake up the next day and it's all been sent to the back room and shipped back to return to vendor and all gone, and suddenly this is in its place. It's kind of mean to do that, right? To be that sudden about it. But that's what Dior did. They almost did kind of like a turn around, I'm going to do a thing with this behind my back, and then, yep, here comes the new one. No warning and no apologies. They just didn't care. Like, nope, this is it now. This is what you get. Only in Europe. Only in Europe do they give you the choice to buy this one. And they give it to you by calling it Original. And you have to order it from the boutiques or go online. It's not even in the high street stores. It's not even common fragrance in Europe. But it still technically exists in some form. Where if you live in anywhere else in the world, if you're in Asia, you're in North America, you're just shit out of luck. You get no access to this unless you buy it from the gray market, which means it could be fake, right? Or you pay an arm and a leg for vintage bottles that look like this one that just say Dior Homme on them. These are going for $150, $200. It's getting ridiculous now. All right, so now the comparison. You've come this far. You want to know what the real differences are. Well, let's just say that starting at the 8-minute mark, let's just say that for the most part, they are entirely different philosophies. The original Dior Homme, which went from 2005 to 2010, saw a slight tweak in 2011 and ran to 2019, was the product of a cultural phenomenon. Some of us call it the metrosexual movement. Me, as a gay man, I just call it a bit of appropriation, but I'm not going to scream cultural appropriation and get up on my soapbox. I don't really care. Most of us didn't care that straight guys suddenly wanted to act gay and have a lisp and have hands like this, but still be straight because it was fashionable, wear scarves, drink lattes like this, whatever. We didn't care. We thought it was funny, all right? We're like, look at these guys. They'll do anything, you know. They'll do anything to get a woman's attention, including stealth it by trying to be gay. It's cool. It was a thing. It happened. You know, guys were wearing tight pants and bell-bottomed out like the 70s. They were wearing cute little vests and striped shirts. They were trying to be fabulous, all right? Straight guys are trying to be fabulous. So the fragrances had to kind of match suit. And the creative director at the time for Dior, a man whose name I'm probably going to butcher, but Hedi Slimane, or it could be Slimane. I think it's Slimane now. Hedi Slimane was appointed creative director of Dior, and he kicked off a men's sartorial division, specifically men's apparel, jackets, sport coats, okay, ties, white shirts. And the Dior Homme line needed its own fragrance. Because there were already tons of other Dior fragrances for men. There was Jules, there was Eau Sauvage, there was Fahrenheit, Dune Pour Homme at the time, Higher, which was Slimane's previous project, was hired in 2001, I think. But Dior Homme was a different range of clothing and thus needed a different fragrance. And he wanted to go into that heroin chic, waif-like, anorexic, smokes cigarettes, is just detached from everything, doesn't care, is like fashionably apathetic, right? Fashionably apathetic to the human condition. Looks like he hasn't eaten in a week and just lives off of cigarettes and like, you know, and espresso. That's his diet, cigarettes and espresso. And of course, just completely like this, right? You remember all the old ads from 2005, 2006. The guys were like this. So the fragrance had to reflect that. So in order to do that, Olivier Polge was asked to go in a sort of gender bend direction, to be masculine but also have feminine traits, to be a little bit waif-like, as I mentioned before, not to be strong and assertive and big muscles boy and beats people up and drives an IROC Z28. None of that nonsense. No Joe Dirt nonsense. None of that, okay? Had to be sophisticated and urbanate and all that stuff. So the fragrance ended up being a sort of mashup between leather and vetiver. Very nice. We all like leather, okay? We all like vetiver. Cedarwood, also, again, nice. We all like that. But then we're going to have some cocoa, some vanilla, and some very powdery, makeup-y, handbaggy type of iris. And of course, that mashup of the, you know, foundation makeup, the lipstick, and the leathery vetiver cedarwood elements, that was extremely bold and brave and controversial, and it was a statement that I am liberated from my own toxic masculinity. I am liberated from society's conventions. I can do what I want. In reality, it's just I'm dressing this way and I'm smelling this way because I want to get laid. That's what it was. I want to get laid. Women will notice me if I do this right now. So it wasn't a cultural statement for most guys, but for some guys it was. And it was a success. A lot of other men's fragrances in and around the same time period were also fruity, melon notes, cherries, very, again, Yves Saint Laurent had L'Homme in 2006, apples and cinnamon and amber, and just all of these, again, these sort of fruity, sweet, patchouli, fruit chuli, more feminine adjacent fragrance styles of the time, merged with some masculine base notes, you know, the oak moss or the leather or the vetiver, or in the case of L'Homme, it had a nice woody amber base profile underneath all the sweet spices. And that's what the 2000s kind of was. I mean, Polo Black was like that. A lot of Kenneth Cole fragrances were like that. RSVP was like that. Signature was like that. Okay. It was the vibe. But Dior kind of was doing it different by having the powder in there, by having the makeup, the handbag powder. And you know, Prada saw this and went, I want that to be my entire identity. Those of you out there could vouch for me on that. You know, if you were around. Prada was like, okay, we'll make our entire house like this. So the entire Infusions range was iris and, you know, soapy neroli notes and powder, you know, Amber Pour Homme, and later on we had Amber Pour Homme Intense, and then we had the Luna Rossa range, and then the Prada L'Homme, and all that powder. So Prada really saw this and went nuts and decided to make this their everything. With their whole chest, they came at this. And if you're into the similar handbaggy, powdery fragrances, Prada was probably your next evolution. Once you got a taste for this, chances are you went from this to the Prada, and then you never looked back. All the fougères, all the chypres, all the leather stuff, all the animalics, they went in the trash. All the aquatics went in the trash. You are now a powder boy. You were a powder boy, and you were wearing your powder fragrances, all because of Dior Homme. And you know what? It's not a bad thing to be, because I love this fragrance. A lot of guys love this fragrance. The Intense version was really good. The Parfum was okay. There was like a half dozen different sport versions of this, which that could be a subject of its own video. A half dozen different sport versions of this. And then also like a half dozen different cologne versions too. People went crazy with flankers on this. Every time you turn around, there was someone making a new flanker. Francis Kurkdjian made flankers for this. Damashi made flankers for this. There was an O version of this in 2014, like a blue version that was like an aquatic iris with aquatic notes. Very strange. Didn't last very long. only a couple years when it was discontinued. But yeah, the flankers got a little bit weird with this one, but very classic. Now, the difference between silver stem and black stem, I told you I would eventually go over that. Well, the difference between the silver stem and the black stem is not a whole lot, really, besides having to remake the fragrance from the ground up so that it has a different formula. So it's not under any corporate espionage or anything like that, right? So, but Dimashi did tinker a little bit. Dimashi took out some of the vanilla. Mainly, he toned down the softness of the fragrance. He toned down some of the more feminine qualities, and he upped the leather, up to the vetiver, up to the cedar. He made it drier, punchier. He took the slider and kind of moved it more towards the middle. Okay, with the original Polish composition, it was a little more towards the femme side. With the Dimashi, he kind of pulled it back over here. But it was still 90% the same, like I said. You barely notice it. Once both fragrances dry down on skin, once they both dry down after an hour or two, indistinguishable. That's only that first hour do you really notice much of a difference at all. The evolution of the fragrance is where it really comes into play, the silver versus the black. And anybody who wants to get argumentative about that, well, I got somewhere you can kiss, okay? I'm not going to show you on camera, but you know how I feel about that sort of thing. You can sit in your box and cry and be angry all you want, and you can unsubscribe to my channel. I don't care. No love lost. Now, moving on to the other Dior Homme, the other one. And we're going to be at the 17-minute mark to hear about the other one, and then we'll ride that out to the 24. So we're going to spend less time talking about this fragrance. Not as much to talk about, really. So the big deal with Dior Homme 2020 is that the whole metrosexual gender exploration thing was passé. Guys were once again alpha male, sigma male grind set. You know, got to be my toxic masculinity. Got to have my Under Armour shirts and my backwards flat brim hat. Got to drive my Subaru with the coffee can muffler while I'm bumping my bro step music and, you know, yeah, bro. That's what it was by 2020. Guys were back on their bullshit again, okay? Guys being guys, basically. Or I should say, straight guys being straight guys, all right? So they didn't want none of the powdery, handbaggy stuff anymore. So Dior was really just kind of forced to get with the program if they wanted to sell bottles. Now, I don't necessarily like that myself. I disagree with it, but money talks and shit walks. So that's what happened. And at very least, Francois Dimashi had the sense to make a more throwback scent profile. He didn't make another Sauvage, didn't make another Aquatic, didn't make another Woody Amber that would bore people because we've already seen that too much. He decided to reach all the way back into the 1950s and early 1960s and bring back the citrus aromatic Chypre Accord. So the Monsieur de Givenchy, the Monsieur Lanvin, the whole Capucci Pour Homme thing, the whole Chanel Pour Homme, the Moustache by Rochas, all of those classic Dapper Gent fragrances with a very sour opening, tart opening, and then that musky, woody, mossy dry down. That's what he wanted to bring back. He wanted to bring back that no nonsense, no sweetness, no fluffiness, okay, no aquatics. He wanted to bring back that sour, tart, forthright kind of scent profile and move it into the 21st century, make it palatable to guys of this time. And he did that by basically saying no oak moss, because we can't really have that, right? And he went more in a direction of let's really play with vetiver, let's play with patchouli, and let's use cashmeran in a really weird way. So he really overamped the cashmeran. He kind of did cashmeran in this the same way that he did Ambroxan in Sauvage. He made it a very discordant note. But honestly, it works because you get that very clean, sour bergamot profile right up front. Clean, sour, punchy, okay. Then you get geranium, because you got to have geranium in a classic 50s fragrance, okay. A lot of 50s fragrances played around with geranium. And then you get the vetiver, you get the woods, there's cedar in here too. Just like Dior Homme, the original one, cedarwood kind of survived the cut. Patchouli is very obvious. And then of course you got some kind of labdanum or labdanum-like material. Probably not real labdanum, because real cistus is kind of expensive. They're not going to use real cistus, they're going to use something else. But that's in there. And then of course the fuzzy cashmeran to give it that musky profile. And it does smell very sour, very sharp, but also very clean, very punchy, and it does everything you would expect a fragrance from that 1950s era to do, which means it comes in sharp pangs and waves. It doesn't sit and hover like a powerhouse would hover. It doesn't hover like a powerhouse. And it's not going to blow you out with all of these harsh materials like Sauvage does, okay? It has that nice middle ground of you notice it in fits and starts, but it doesn't overwhelm you. It is just the complete psychological, socio-political, socio-analytical, economic, everything else. You know, it is at the other end of the spectrum in terms of the personality, and the kind of guy that would wear this is opposite to the kind of guy that would wear this. This is the guy that, like I said, has scarves, cute vests. He likes his petticoats in the wintertime, okay? He likes his petticoats and his mittens. He listens to folk rock, okay? He probably spins records. He's a bit of a hipster, all right? Likes to collect VHS tapes. He's a bit of a reader. He's a literature kind of guy. He's a bookwormish kind of guy, you know. This is the dude who likes to shop at Men's Warehouse. He drives a sports car. He likes to play football. He jogs every morning. He is all about that whole, you know, wolf thing with the alpha, beta, sigma, go to the gym, okay. He's one of those, it is better to ask for forgiveness and ask for permission kind of guys. He is the corporate vulture culture. This is the guy that wears this, all right? And if this guy was in an alley with this guy, he'd probably beat him up, honestly. This guy would probably beat this guy up, but this guy's probably got a taser and hasn't said nothing in the end. When he gets too close, he's going to zap him, and that's it anyway. He's going to run and then call the police. But, you know, my little story time is over. That's kind of the personality between these two. And honestly, you can be fans of both. That's my big takeaway before I wrap this up. You can be fans of both. You just have to understand that they represent two different cultures of masculinity. They represent two different periods in time. This was the mid-2000s, where guys wanted to be vulnerable. They wanted to show a little more sophistication and act a little more bookish, right? And a little more flamboyant stylistically. This is returning us to that golden era that, you know, the society conservatives want, basically, is what this kind of represents. The square jaw, ubermensch, I drive a Chevy, you know, I wear trilbies, I'm dressed in sartorial. I go to the grocery store wearing a three-piece suit, right? My wingtips are always polished, that kind of thing, you know. I'm gonna box you up because you talk about my girl kind of thing. That's definitely this person here. And that's the mentality that Dior has to serve, because ultimately it's about who has the money. And the soft-spoken, sophisticated guys had the money in the 2000s. And the square jaw, Giga Chad guys are the ones who have the money now in 2024 and 2023. So there you guys go. That's been my Dior Homme Showdown. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your comments, whether you like one better or the other, or whether you like both. And thanks for watching.